is the DeFi Decoded podcast by 9 Point Partners. The ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast should not be taken as investment advice. Always consult with your financial advisor before investing.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of DeFi Decoded. I am Alex Tapscott here with Andrew Young. Last week, the presidential election turned the tables for crypto. The market has been on an absolute tear. And some of the biggest winners from this recent rally have been some of the more well-established so-called blue chip crypto projects, whether they're DeFi projects with established business models like Uniswap or Aave, or some of the alternative, the layer ones like Solana and Avalanche have seen their tokens perform very, very well. There's been some interesting dialogue about why that is. One of the reasons is that I think a lot of people believe there will be some greater regulatory clarity in the United States around digital assets, and that's going to be helpful in a lot of different ways. It's going to help clarify, how to define these different kinds of assets, but it's also going to mean that more enterprises and institutions can adopt these underlying platforms because they now understand the rules of the road. Avalanche in particular has been a project that I think has done a really terrific job, really since inception, of cultivating users within the enterprise and institutional arena. And that's been in large part thanks to the pioneering work of Ava Labs, and specifically to the president of Ava Labs, John Wu, who happens to be our guest for today. John is someone who has been in the financial and technology world for quite some time. On a personal note, John and I actually met each other 15 years ago or more when I was doing something different. And he was at Tiger Management, a preeminent hedge fund with 20 billion in assets under management. And that was just before he launched his own global technology portfolio management company, Kingdom Capital. So John is someone who's been really at the intersection of technology and finance for really, decades. And so he's kind of the perfect person to run Ava Labs. And he's the perfect person for us to have on the show because last week, we really did talk a lot about, the market reaction. Now I want to talk about Web3 adoption and what maybe this new era of greater clarity and perhaps even support from government means for how companies and institutions are going to adopt platforms like Ava Labs and Avalanche. So, John, first off, I just want to say thank you very much for joining us today.
Alex, it's a pleasure. And you're right. We've known each other for a long time. I was a traditional investor of various funds. Just to correct the timing a bit, though, when we met, I was at Kingdom, and I was at Tiger before. And then I started my own fund after Kingdom. But, tech investor, seeing the trends and seeing emerging, call it technology trends from the internet, search, e-commerce, social, SaaS, and all the way through mobile, et cetera, social media. And then in 2014-ish, I decided to invest in a space. And really that was just Bitcoin. And then in 2017, I decided to be an operator because we saw, Alex, you probably remember, we were just talking back then, I remember specifically, and you had CryptoKitties, you had ICOs, and I said, oh my God, on this Ethereum, the programmability of it can lead to real use cases. And that's what really got me excited. And I became an operator. I wanted to really provide access to, back then, private securities to a tokenized manner called security token using an ATS and brokerage license. And then Avalanche came out of the brain and PhD students of Dr. Eamon Gunseer, a distributed systems professor at the Cornell Computer Science Department. I happened to go there undergrad. And when he said he was solving a lot of the trilemma, I was so excited and became president. And that was 5 years ago. Yeah. And look at us now. It's been a great, great experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I love that progression of the major technology trends as they were happening and kind of changing the way we do business. And I want to talk a little bit about, programmable blockchains, smart contracts, and some of the biggest opportunities that you see. So you mentioned at the outset there that you were focused initially on the idea of tokenizing securities, what I think now has been called RWAs, or real world assets. What do you see as the big inefficiencies or opportunities within financial services? And then what are some ways in which Avalanche is being used currently to address those kinds of things?
Yep. Well, the number one thing, even back then, you and I talked about what tokenization to us was a killer app, because you can put value on the internet through on top of a blockchain and move it around and lower the cost of moving value around. It was the internet of value, if you remember. I think you wrote about it many times.
Yeah.
There's no reason why the internet, search, and other forms of communications on the internet have taken costs from communications and telecom or information through searching down to almost zero for the user. And yet value still costs so much, whether it's a credit card for 2.5%, 3%, or wire transfers of $25 a pop, or overseas, whether it's the FX spread, the embedded price in there, or the call it remittance markets, where it's still 10, 15% cost just to move money overseas. So this is the natural progression. And I think the number one thing that we're going to see in 2025 is hopefully some stablecoin regulation. Stablecoin, many have already cited various numbers, but based on some research, there's more dollars that have been settled in stablecoins than the Visa network as a whole on any given year. So I think there's real product market proof for stablecoins. And then we move on from there, whether it's money market funds to longer duration assets like other credit funds, to someday private equity again, and tokenizing actual private equity shares or actually alternative funds. And I think that is very exciting, because the people on this podcast or this call listening in who are in the financial services like you and I were know how hard it is for individuals, especially accredited plus in the US, to get access to some of the things that they have in terms of as an institution, but the same person can't get access to it as an individual. Hopefully the tokenization markets will provide that access. But in the meantime, the first thing is lowering the cost of value moving around the internet.
Yeah, sounds to me like the two ways of describing that would be efficiency and democratization. And I look at the stablecoin market as this really amazing example where stablecoins have addressed both of those. We take it for granted that people like you and I living in places like New York and Toronto have access to U.S. dollars and U.S. dollar bank accounts and U.S. dollar trading accounts and all the rest of it. But actually, for about 6.5 out of the 7.5 billion people in the world, that's almost an impossibility. And being able even just to store value in dollars has been really, really difficult. So stablecoins, a lot of people think of it in our world as a payment tool or a thing that you use to trade crypto or to store value when you're not, investing in risk assets. For people in a lot of parts of the world, it's actually a way to preserve their wealth, right? To be able to store money in a way that isn't subject to the kind of inflation that you see in other parts of the world.
That's right.
And then I think yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
In fact, Ava Labs was just down for the Avalanche Summit in Argentina. And in Argentina, about 30 to 40% of the general populace transact in crypto on a regular basis. That's the numbers that were quoted with me, because the high inflation environment, especially before Javier Milei became president, it's still relatively high. As a Argentinian citizen, you have basically three options when you receive your pesos in the paycheck. One is to pay exorbitant rates to effectively almost illegally convert to dollars in some black market application. So literally a 20% fee just to convert to a US dollar, or convert to some sort of cryptocurrency, or three, spend it right away, because there's no reason in saving your money in a high inflationary environment. And we as Americans and you as Canadians are very lucky to have, call it fintech rails that are pretty good and work pretty well. But there are plenty of places in the world where they really appreciate this a lot more than people in the developed world.
Definitely. Andrew?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I guess what I'm really curious about is, what do you think the next, like in the short term after stablecoins, what do you think is the next sort of prime suspect for tokenization? Like we've heard a lot, obviously over the years, we've heard a ton about securities getting tokenized. It seems like the timelines have just consistently gone pushed back. But then at the same time, stablecoin growth has way surpassed expectations. So it's kind of funny, like when in the RWA space, like the most obvious thing, which was stablecoins, has way surpassed expectations, I would say, like from when I came into the space 7 years ago, whereas the sort of other real world assets have way underperformed expectations. We're starting to see a little bit of growth with like treasuries, which are almost like, in a way, stablecoins that pay a yield. I'm just kind of curious, like, what do you see in the next 6 to 12 months beyond stablecoins as like the next big catalyst?
Yeah, well, I hope stablecoins itself becomes, regulated properly in the U.S. 99% of the stablecoins are backed by dollars. And so I hope, first of all, it's not a given that in 6 months, stablecoin regulation will happen. Even it's another almost 3 months before the new administration goes in there. And then they're going to have time to figure out the new people. And then you have to go to Congress, et cetera, et cetera. So it will take time for even stablecoins to actually be prolific. But what happens is, like a chain like Avalanche, it is EVM compatible, so assets can move back and forth on Ethereum. And then when you issue these stablecoins, this is why this is one of the fastest assets on the Avalanche ecosystem. When you issue one of these things, it allows people to move things around so easily. And then you think about the next step, which is a little bit longer duration. Another thing that is happening, being tokenized on Avalanche, is money market funds, or as you said before, T-bills as well. So it's the short duration ones that I see will become, or go in order. First is just fiat, and then you'll have shorter duration treasuries, and then a little bit longer duration, as we talked about earlier. But one that is not conventional that people don't realize is that I think there are going to be tokenized assets that people don't associate traditionally with finance. So one of the big games, for instance, on Avalanche is called Off the Grid. It's created. It's a AAA published game created by a company called Gonzilla. These are experienced game publishers. They raised over $100 million to create this game. Within about a month, they have close to 10 million wallets created and about 2 to 3 million transactions per day. So what they're doing is putting the in-game asset market on chain to create a marketplace. So when you think about this, all of a sudden, these tokenized virtual swords, tokenized virtual shields, whatever it is, tokenized things that are created in-game, suddenly will have more value to the user because now they can trade these things around, and maybe other games will join this marketplace, and it becomes like a much better marketplace where you can actually have value and move it around using stable coins. Right now, it's kind of a lot of games, are more like, I would call it a carnival. You go there, your dad or mom, when you were a kid, I hand over dollars, you guys handed over Canadian dollars, and you got these little fake coins, and you went around, you play these games, and then at the end of the night, if you didn't finish all of them, you left them there and it was gone. But in this, that's what's happening in gaming as well. But now you can actually move if stable coins happen, suddenly these new tokenized assets come out of nowhere and they can be moved from one game to another. That's going to be very powerful. I mean, the gaming market alone is a $300 billion market. Only 50 of that is actually in-game assets. Imagine if you actually feel like you own it, you custody it, and you can move that from one place to another. Suddenly, that 50 is going to grow the pie of gaming a lot faster.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's a theme that we've touched on before in the past, which is the idea that people are already spending tens of billions of dollars on things that they buy but they don't own, right? They're comfortable making the purchase, and yet they don't actually own it in any real sense of the word. And so the idea that you can just add this added layer of functionality to something you're already doing seems like very low-hanging fruit. One of the challenges, there have been several challenges. One has been the technology, and I want to switch to talking a little bit about Avalanche and what makes it different. But it's hard to trade in a $2 asset if the fees are $10, right? So it's important to have high throughput, low latency chains to make these kinds of applications possible. We'll get to that in a second. And then the other thing is the regulatory side, right? Like, if someone buys a sword in a game and it goes up in value in an open marketplace from $20 to $60. Do they have to like claim capital gains on that or something? So figuring out the rules around that, I think, is also a big obstacle. And maybe stablecoin regulation is going to be an important first step in that direction. So let's pivot to Avalanche. So Andrew and I, we talk about the technology stuff. Andrew's like a deep technology guy. The last cycle, there was this thing where Ethereum kind of became a victim of its own success. The fees went up quite a lot. TVL went from 100% Ethereum down to like 60% Ethereum because other chains were emerging that did things a little bit differently. Avalanche was part of that first wave, right, in that period and had a lot of success. And today, I think it's a top 10 asset in terms of market value and one that's very much an extremely alive and active chain for users and application developers. But now that we're moving forward, there seems to be this bifurcation of sorts where it's like there's the Ethereum, well, there's sort of like three paths, and Andrew might correct me because he's saying I don't know what I'm talking about. But basically, you got the Ethereum main chain, then you've got layer 2 networks that are built on top, right? And then you've got totally separate protocols that are trying to like be the Ethereum killer, maybe like a Solana. Then you've got EVM compatible chains that are also very different that also offer, higher throughput and finality. And I think of Avalanche as being in the center category, right? Is that a fair characterization? And then sort of like from there, I see you nodding, so I'm going to just assume that you agree.
Well, typically everything you say makes sense, so I'm going to be nodding a lot. I'm going to have to control my nodding. But that is a very good way to classify everything.
My view is always, and sorry, my view just briefly is just that, well, actually, you know what? You go ahead. I'm going to stop talking.
Well, no, but you're absolutely correct. So you have different types of layer 1s or chains out there. You have obviously Ethereum, and then you have the layer 2s. Layer 2s help Ethereum scale. And then you have Solana, which is kind of like your own silo walled garden type approach, if you will. Yeah. Then you have EVM compatible chains. So EVM compatible work well with the biggest sandbox on the playground, which is Ethereum. Solana, you have to have different type of programming, and it's not as easy to move things. It's impossible. It's hard to move things back and forth. And I think the other thing to keep in mind here is that you have also Bitcoin, don't forget. So basically go way back when, Bitcoin has its, I think, in my opinion, product market proof as a store of value digital gold.
100%.
One chain, one token, or one utility token. And then you have Ethereum. You can look at that as one chain, many tokens, if you will. And then you have Avalanche, which is many chains, many tokens. Avalanche is actually a network of networks. So what the latest upgrade to the Avalanche network allows developers to do is they can create their application and spin up their own layer 1, their own L1, if you will, because that allows them to create better applications because they can control the infrastructure and the environment. It's customizable to their needs. If you're a gaming app, you need a lot of throughput. But if you're in institutional finance, you need other things like, KYC AML. So you need other specs. So allowing you to have your own customizable execution environment to develop your own, application on top allows the application to be better and the users to have a better experience. There's basically 3 types of chains that have this type of architecture. Avalanche, I think Cosmos, and Polkadot. Obviously, Avalanche is by far, in terms of any metric, the leader of that. And, this is part of the original vision from Dr. Eamon Gunseer from the very beginning, which is, not everything you cannot have a blanket prescription to solve all the patient's needs, or you can't have a blanket prescription if this space is really going to grow. You need more customizable things for different applications. And I think Avalanche and Ava Labs have done a good job of this.
Yeah, no, I think Avalanche was definitely one of the pioneers of this. It's a little bit different than Ethereum's roadmap because Ethereum, it's obviously like layer 2s, whereas with Avalanche, I believe with subnets, like you said, they're fully separate L1s. Actually, kind of one of the questions, though, is with layer 2s, you get to leverage the security of Ethereum, whereas the the sort of Cosmos Avalanche approach of almost scaling fully horizontally. How do these subnets? Can these subnets use like shared security? How do they like leverage? I guess like the liquidity and the security of the Avalanche mainnet.
Yeah, Andrew, that's a great question. So for your TradFi people, basically there's a lot of nodes in Ethereum. So you're drafting off of this decentralization to have more security is I think what you're referring to. Avalanche, the primary chain, already has a lot of validators or nodes out there, so it's already decentralized. What we are going to provide at Ava Labs is basically think of it as a marketplace for your choosing of how many validators and a validator marketplace to help you secure your own L1. And that will leverage off of the existing decentralization of the existing Avalanche chain, but allow you to customize it based on your desired needs. If you are an institution, you may even want a proof of authority, and you don't want necessarily traditional, paying gas and validating. But on certain things, you may want just a few just to have security. And other things, you may want a lot, and you want to basically leverage as many of the nodes as possible in Avalanche. So there will be, call it a marketplace for that created by Ava Labs.
And is the goal to target more of these sort of like bring institutions? Because I feel like I've seen a lot of announcements, a lot of like the crypto audience, I feel like has been seeing a lot of, like big institutions choosing Avalanche. Whereas the early days of Avalanche, it was more like the DeFi kingdoms, like more crypto native apps. I believe DeFi Kingdoms was built on Avalanche Subnet. So is that kind of like a little bit of the shift in focus from kind of crypto native consumer apps to more, institutional and RWA for these subnets?
So one of the things that differentiates Ava Labs and Avalanche is from day one, it was always the vision to basically service the crypto native as well as the crossover users and enterprises. Certain chains out there are very good at servicing just the crypto retail. Others have tried to just go to the enterprise side of it, and either they become a private blockchain or it doesn't work out well. We had a dual mission, which was to create a healthy ecosystem in crypto native where it's a fantastic, call it petri dish of experimentation, genius, and a lot of activity that can possibly show the way for what kind of things can be done to the crossover enterprises or traditional finance companies to create applications. So the reason why you see a lot of that is because one of the things I think especially recently, is because a lot of these traditional enterprises, when they want a robust, scalable chain with their required needs, Avalanche is frankly the best place for it. There are other places where, not every blockchain is for everyone. There are still enterprises that just want a private blockchain. They don't want interoperability. But I think the trend is that traditional finance and other enterprises want to leverage Web3 in its fullest. And even if right now they cannot be interoperable around the entire Web3 ecosystem, they want that easy optionality when that world appears to them, and when it's meaning regulatory wise, or when the world gets bigger and the ecosystem of Web3 as a whole, they want to access that for liquidity, for other reasons. So they are starting to choose more and more this Avalanche network and networks, so they can have their current paradigm, which is more closed, especially if you're institutional finance, but have the easy optionality into a more open ecosystem to tap the composability as well as the liquidity in the future.
I agree. I've always said that like Ethereum compatibility is something that feels very important for any sort of chain to scale, at least in these early days. But I also think that the things that Avalanche does differently allow it to stand out to a lot of different kinds of developers and users. On the enterprise side, John, you know this about me, like I co-founded the Blockchain Research Institute in 2017. And our founding members included companies like NASDAQ and Microsoft and Accenture. We've had like Coca-Cola and Exxon and Manulife and Tencent, and all these big companies have been members. So these are companies that paid money to join in order to access research, insights, events, education, resources, you name it, right? And so there's always been, my point is that there's always been a lot of interest or curiosity from enterprise in Web3. I think a lot of people think of this as a new thing, but that's not true. And even more recently, Coinbase did a survey that showed that something like half of all Fortune 100 companies are doing something in Web3. But it's always felt to me like never quite prime time, never quite commercial for most of these guys. It's, LVMH doing NFTs as like limited edition luxury goods, and similarly, Dior and these other companies. Or it's been financial services firms, exploring tokenized securities on blockchains. But something maybe seems to have shifted in the last year or so, especially around financial services. Like Franklin Templeton is running full nodes on 17 different proof of stake networks, and BlackRock launched BUIDL, and you're seeing other, like you and I, were you at the Coinbase Summit this summer with me?
I was, yes.
That to me was an inflection point where I was like, okay, this isn't just proof of concept. Like there's a lot of real rubber hitting the road in finance. And I want to talk a little bit about enterprise, right? Like what are some of those big, if not low-hanging fruit, because none of this is easy, big opportunities where you think with a combination of new tech, maybe clear rules of the road, and a bull market, where we might see some big enterprise examples? Like what are the big implementations that you're excited about?
So before I I'll share some of the big implementations shortly, but I think we need to roll back that question to the earlier part of it when you were describing the situation. You and I have been talking since, you've been a big help. You and your dad have been a huge help in getting institutions over the hump and trying things out. So what we've seen, and no one goes from step functions from Web 2 to Web 3. Reality is there is Web 2.1, 2.3, 2.5, 2.7, and then 3.0. So, in the early days, pioneers like yourself and, myself and the early days of Dr. Eamon Gunseer, we're just trying to get people to go to 2.1. And 2.1 is really just, if I'm going to create something, let's do it on a distributed ledger or database instead of doing it the old single silo type of way, because I can get efficiencies out of it and I can have some cost savings. 2.3 is like, well, why don't I throw in, a wallet and create a marketplace because things can move a lot faster and easier. I think, call it 2.5, 2.6, whatever it is. It's going to be when like the stablecoins allow those assets to actually move around and go on and off the rails easily. And ultimately there's, iterations. And 3.0 is true tokenization, true Web3 open world, which is, those utility tokens help you dictate and coordinate the development around and incentivize the usage in the proper way. And throughout that path, I think a lot of people have frankly killed many brain cells, myself and you. I was trying to do a security token offering marketplace for private securities, like back then before they went IPO was Uber and Airbnb. And, I think I actually at the previous place using an ATS and we solved the RegTech problem. But reality is, the world wasn't ready for it. And also the technologies, you remember CryptoKitties broke Ethereum and there was no off-ramp into other layer ones like Avalanche or layer 2s at the time. So none of this is overnight. It has been a long journey. Just like people all think, ChatGPT created AI. That's not the case. The AI has been around in some form, from machine learning to regular AI, to all of a sudden it was just until November 2022, I guess, where ChatGPT made it obvious. And that was supposedly the big commercial breakthrough to everyone. I think the commercial breakthrough is going to come later still. I don't see it from a consumer perspective just yet. But I do see a B2B breakthrough, which is this, again, going back to stablecoins. I think that is going to be the watershed moment. And I think a year ago, why this happened and started really happening was finally, and you have to give, I guess, Larry Fink some credit here, because finally a titan in traditional finance who had been a no-coiner, in 2021 and 2 years ago, suddenly realized the virtues of tokenization and what it can do through their teams, digital teams, good work and all of that. And they realized that, hey, tokenization has its place in this world and can change things. So them Fidelity as well was in there. They've been in, they've had a digital research group for a long time. So you needed a few of these big players to actually endorse it and really make this movement happen in about a year ago. So I think that's why about a year ago, you really saw this take off in some function, or at least the slope increased a bit. It's still not a step function in terms of improvement.
Yeah.
So talking a little bit more about Avalanche and Ava Labs, what you guys are working on, what's like the next sort of 12 months look like from a roadmap point of view? What are you most excited about?
Right. So for your users or the listeners here, Ava Labs is the software services company that created Avalanche. Avalanche is governed and run by a foundation, but Ava Labs also creates tools and has services to help developers come on, and also creates infrastructure to allow users to access Avalanche a lot easier. So just so people understand, what the distinction is. And the stuff we're doing in terms of helping certain industries, like first of all, gaming is we've had so many games. I mean, we're talking about it overseas as well. Nexon, it's a publicly traded company in Japan. They have a game called Maple Story. It's got close to 200 million users, and daily and monthly actives are far off the charts compared to anything that exists in traditional or old school crypto. And they are building a blockchain-enabled solution. So gaming is one area that we're super excited about. So we're servicing a lot of those companies who want to come over. But yet, there are other areas that are super exciting as well. Social media is another good example. And that's a great example because there's native crypto social media companies trying to do it about their way. And then there is actually a more Web2 social media company that was always privacy first. And we just announced it, I think, recently. It's called MeWe, as 20 million users. It's never going to be Facebook. It was never designed to be Facebook. It was designed for people who care about privacy. And because of that lended so well to putting all the functionality on a blockchain. So when you get 20 million users that are like, roughly 1.5 million now that are now using the blockchain enabled version, that's where the users are going to come from. When you have games that are like, it's close to 200 million registered users that have been playing this game for, 10 plus years, all of a sudden switching over to the blockchain enabled solution because it's better functionality. That's where you're going to get a lot of the users, in my opinion. But again, like Stars Arena, which is a native social media platform, they're doing decent for, it's not 20 million users coming over 1 million a day, but they've got for a native social media platform, they've got over 250,000 users now. And they're showing what can be done with like these, transactions of what they call tickets, and how you can generate value in a different way from what traditional social media does. So we're excited about that. Obviously, we're always excited about institutional finance players that are going to launch more applications. But, even DeFi, it's amazing how stable, ever since the election, even in traditional crypto, when I say traditional crypto, I mean like native crypto, the amount of projects have just started picking up. It was almost like everyone did 2.1 and they stopped to wait for the elections. I think either way, whoever won, they would have moved forward. Then the question is, when they move over in 2.1, were they going to 2.3 or are they going to 2.5? So all of a sudden, you've seen a spurt even in crypto native stuff. And I think what's going to be most exciting for Avalanche, and what users should be aware of, is we've got 135 or plus L1s. We call them not subnets anymore. We call them L1s because subnet is like it connotes a different thing. You're not inferior. You're on layer one, so it should be called L1s. We've got 135 plus L1s that are in testnet that will be launching live on mainnet, call it, in 6 months or so. So there's going to be a deluge of activity that people think happened overnight when it's been building for the last, call it, quarter, two, and another 2 quarters.
Are those L1s application specific? Or are they like industry specific?
Perfect example would be the off the grid one. That one is a gaming, test net it has massive amounts of usage and lots of users already, and they can actually flip to mainnet anytime they want based on traction. But like most Web2 stuff, most products in Web2, they want to make it perfect product market fit kind of thing and really test out all the bugs, just like institutional finance would as well. In crypto and Web3, we have a tendency to iterate and to throw things out and let the community tell you what you need to do, so you iterate back and forth. But in Web2, you can't do that. So a lot of these and even in Web3 developers, they need to have proper security. They need to take time. They'll come out in 3 to 5 months as opposed to 6 to 9 months. But still, there's a lot of call it activity that's behind the surface that people don't realize.
Absolutely. And I find it kind of funny that people in Web3 like ship first and ask questions later, because like a lot of Web3 applications deal with assets. It's like people putting money into smart contracts. And actually, when real value is at stake, you like probably should be more confident in the technology rather than less confident in the technology. So it's good to hear that there's real testing going on before they ship product. John, this has been an awesome discussion. I'm so glad we got to touch on Avalanche and all the different projects that are being built there and learn about some of the differences between Avalanche and some of these other platforms, and also to hear your point of view on the market and where we're headed next. That was a really great conversation. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much for joining us. For people who want to learn more, where should they go?
So I'm on X at John, the number 1, Wu, John 1 WU, or you can go to the avalabs.org website and connect with me there, or LinkedIn.
Awesome. All right, that's it for this week's episode of DeFi Decoded. I'm Alex Tapscott here with Andrew Young. Make sure to like, share, and comment on the podcast. It helps other people find it. Until next week, have a good one. Cheers.
Thank you both.
The information contained herein does not constitute an offer or solicitation by anyone in the United States or in any other jurisdiction in which such an offer or solicitation is not authorized, or to any person to whom it is unlawful to make such an offer or solicitation. Prospective investors who are not residents in Canada should contact their financial advisor to determine whether securities of the funds may be lawfully sold in their jurisdiction.